What if the future of global fintech is actually being built in Asia? For years, the biggest fintechs have been built in the US. Think Stripe, PayPal, Square, and so many others. But there are some smart companies doing some pretty cool stuff in Asia as well. Airwallex is one of those companies. They started in Melbourne, Australia, and they built an Asia-first payment infrastructure business. That gives them a real edge as they expand globally because they can help global companies expand in Asia thanks to their local knowledge. On the Asia Tech Podcast, we want to know what is going on in the tech space so we can be prepared, take advantage of innovation, and not get left behind. So I invited Jon Stona from Airwallex to tell us more about how the company is expanding globally from Asia and what we can learn from it. Jon, thank you so much for coming and doing this. I really appreciate your time. Let's just jump right into this conversation. What is Airwallex? Just tell us, what is it? Why was it conceived? How did it happen? Why are we here?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, thank you so much, Michael, for having me on board. Certainly a joy to be here. So I know you have quite an international audience, so I appreciate some folks might not be as familiar with Airwallex. Yep. But the TLDR is that we are one of the globe's leading payment and financial platforms. And so what we do is we help businesses of all shapes and sizes manage everything from payments, spend management, money movement, all the way to embedded finance. So the way to kind of think about this in more simple terms is it's almost like a financial operating system for your business. So more of a modern day alternative to legacy banking.
Got it. A modern day alternative to legacy banking. So this is the other thing, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Yeah. Is there a bank account replacement? Do people need bank accounts today? Do you know what I mean? Like, how does an e-wallet work in relation to banks? Like, how would you explain this to people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think you need a bank account at a traditional bank per se. I think you do need somewhere to securely hold your money, right? And there are various options to do that. And so, for example, the way that it works with Airwallex, especially if you are, say, a business that's operating across borders, in a traditional sense, let's say you wanted to sell into 5 different markets. Potentially you'd have to go fly to these individual markets, fill out a bunch of paperwork, wait in line, pop out your Google Translate app and figure out how to actually fill out this paperwork. Whereas in reality, when you have modern solutions like Airwallex, you can just do that all from the comfort of your desk, right? And so it's an online process. You can set up accounts around the world, and again, lets you do so in a multi-currency way, so that you can essentially collect money in one currency. And not necessarily, if let's say you have to pay suppliers in that same currency, you don't have to go through that, again, legacy, painful, expensive process of having to convert and then reconvert. You essentially collect in one currency, store in one currency, and pay out in the same currency. So, cheaper for businesses, saves them a lot of time in the process as well.
Got it. So I worked at huge financial institutions, right? Some you may have heard of, like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, little companies.
Small. They seem to be doing okay these days. Yeah,
Okay, kind of okay. But there, I also started in the back office. So I ended up on a trading desk, right? But I started off in the back office, and they actually did that with a lot of people so that we could get a better understanding of like what happened when we did a trade, right? They actually made us read a book called What Happens After the Trade.
Yes.
Because the idea was you could have this really fancy idea for how to make money, but if it couldn't get processed on the back end, then you didn't make that money because there was no way to process it. So what I'm really interested in, before we get into some of the other stuff, is like what actually happens on the back end of a payment. So I know you're not the tech guy, but I'm just super curious, like what the flow is, if you can go into that, if that makes sense, because I don't understand it yet.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the easiest way for me to kind of explain this is think about money movement, especially across borders, as essentially money moving on a highway, right, or a series of highways. So when someone essentially tries to pay you, there are a bunch of kind of different players involved in that chain. Let's say an acquirer, an acquiring bank, a gateway, but essentially folks that help you take money from an end customer and then process it and move it across a highway so that it fundamentally, at some juncture, gets to your destination from that highway. Now, the problem in a kind of legacy world is that along that highway, there are kind of different intermediary banks. And so everyone kind of takes a bit of a toll, right? And so imagine, again, a legacy world where you have this gigantic highway running from one country to another, and then you have all these toll gates. Whereas, Airwallex's approach was, and I can talk a little bit about the founding story because it's actually quite an interesting one, is we're going to kind of bypass that highway. We're going to bypass that legacy system and essentially build our own proprietary infrastructure so that you have a much shorter highway and you don't necessarily have people collecting tolls at every stop. But you really, when you think about fintech and money movement, it's essentially moving from point A to point B and then running across a highway, right? Now, I think you asked me a little bit earlier about Airwallex company, how it was founded, and
Yep.
I think if I kind of take a step back,
Please.
and talk a little bit about something which is so inherent to, I think, startups and entrepreneurs, and it's almost this notion of the ability to have the mindset where you kind of see an obstacle as an opportunity. And when you think about some of the most powerful and well-known startups in the world, a lot of them have actually come from this grounded mindset. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you know Canva, for example. Do you kind of have a
Yep.
sense of how Canva was kind of conceived?
Mm.
So I mean, Canva essentially was Melanie Perkins was teaching at university, and she was teaching design programs like Photoshop and InDesign, and she thought they were just so complex and difficult, and it would take an entire they are. It would take an entire semester.
I use them all the time. They're very complicated.
Yeah, and it would take an entire semester for people to just learn the basics. And so a lot of people cared about design, and so wanted to create good content, but didn't have the right tools. And so that frustration helped her conceive of Canva, right? I mean, same thing with Zoom. Eric Yuan, the founder of Zoom, Zoom was conceived, the initial concept, when I think Eric was in university. He would talk about taking these long train rides to see his girlfriend at the time, now his wife. And, he's there sitting in these painfully long journeys, thinking, my goodness, surely there must be a better way to actually connect, with loved ones.
Stay in touch.
Exactly, right. Not take 10 hours every time. And so, again, a real frustration that bore fruit for this opportunity. Airwallex is actually no different. So a couple of the founders in particular, Jack and Max, they were actually running a coffee shop, a cafe in Melbourne. And when you're running a coffee shop, you obviously have to buy a lot of goods and items, plates and cups and straws and napkins, etc. And typically, you're probably sourcing these from global suppliers. And they just got so frustrated on a day-to-day basis because they would have to pay these international suppliers. And like we spoke about at the start, sometimes it would take 3 to 5 days. They'd get hit with these, enormous transaction
ridiculous fees.
Sometimes it wouldn't even get there. Maybe there was a return of the transaction. They have to start all over again. It was just, again, a painful process. And so, that kind of gave the foundation and impetus to say, when we think about money movement, there must be a better way to do this more efficiently. And what started off as selling lattes, this is probably one of the biggest pivots in startup history, selling lattes in Melbourne to selling global financial infrastructure and being, $100 billion, processing per year, right? So really a phenomenal story. And again, that whole notion of a mindset, obstacles to opportunities is so foundational to entrepreneurs and so foundational to Airwallex and the folks that we serve.
It's a little bit of a side point, but I want to corroborate this. I was teaching a couple of years ago a class on innovation to kids like 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds. And they were like, where does innovation come from?
Yeah.
And I would always say to them, think about a problem you have that you complain to your friends about all the time and that they also have and that your parents have. And all of you are sitting around going, shouldn't somebody, who's going to solve this problem?
Yeah.
That's your innovation. Like that's how innovation happens, right?
Exactly. I will say though that innovation though, it requires the ideation, but it also requires the action. And I think that really oftentimes separates, good entrepreneurs to kind of truly great entrepreneurs. That ability to actually internalize that in your day-to-day life as well, can have immense returns on your kind of personal life also.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody has ideas. Very few people can actually execute any of those ideas. Can we get back to this highway thing for a second? Because I want to understand just a little bit better. And by the way, now that you've told me this story, I feel like the Airwallex name was like really, like there was a reason behind it. It was almost like the Airbnb for wallets, but they probably couldn't get the T, so they just said, screw it, we'll take the X. Like, I love this. I must be close to this, no?
Well, I mean, the X was really because of the Forex piece at the start. So originally, again, one of the first use cases was that kind of efficient. Yeah, but now it's just morphed into so much more, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about the highways. Does that mean right? That Airwallex basically has an account, a bank account, kind of, I'm not going to say everywhere in the world, but in most countries in the world where they operate. And I'm simplifying to make the point, right?
Sure.
So that if I want to move money, right, like if I'm in Boston, but I have to pay somebody in yen, they're not doing an FX trade with my dollars. They're taking my dollars into their account, right? And then they're taking yen from an account already in Tokyo and sending it to that supplier in Japan. So they're eliminating the necessity at most times to actually do the FX through the traditional foreign exchange system. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, we're kind of bypassing a lot of the kind of legacy approaches, but we're also making sure that, particularly when it comes to payouts as well, oftentimes we're kind of integrated with kind of local rails, also, or local forms of
For
payments, and
sure.
so you're kind of bypassing the entire Swift process. But in terms of kind of banking partners as well, I mean, security and compliance certainly one of the most important aspects of fintech, and so
Yeah,
we have so many kind of top tier banking partners around the world,
for sure.
and licenses, all around the world as well, right? So we take that aspect incredibly seriously.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have to deal with the bank because that's where the actual money is sitting, right? But it's the layer on top of the bank that you're building and the way you connect to them, bypassing, like you said, all of the traditional highways, building your own highway so you don't have to pay for it every time you use it.
Exactly, and then also building on top of that, on top of the infrastructure. I think what really is what's driving a lot of the momentum as well is the kind of software layer, because we do again want to be that financial operating system, and we realize that the kind of treasury aspect is one aspect, but when you
Yep.
think about areas like expense management, right? That's kind of software layer that kind of comes on top to make the value proposition that much more kind of sticky and useful.
So I want to see if I understand this again correctly, and
Sure.
maybe the listeners will appreciate this too. So I had the founder of Deal. I don't know if you've heard of Deal.
Yeah, no deal. Of course.
Deal's an Israeli company, right, that basically takes away the human resources responsibility for companies. And the idea for Deal is you focus on your core competencies. Your core competency, you're not an HR company. We'll help you do the hiring, but also we'll set up an entity in every country in the world so that if you want to hire somebody in Thailand, we already have all the regs and rules covered. So we can hire them directly into Deal, but they're kind of like seconded to you. And we make payments for them and do all this stuff on the HR side, so you don't have to worry about it. It also means you don't have to know all the rules and regs in every country.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that Airwallex is kind of doing the same thing on the finance side, so that if I want to have the financial operating system and use it, that it's not just payments, but it's all the finance and regs and rule stuff? Are you basically taking that away from companies because that's not their core competency, so then they can use Airwallex instead?
Exactly. I mean, we're abstracting away a lot of the complexity that
Yep.
typically is involved in again,
Yep.
moving kind of money movement. And so we don't expect you to be, a payments expert. I mean, especially if you're running a small business and you want to expand, you probably have better things to do than read 900 pages of payment regulation. So I
Exactly.
should hope so. Otherwise, your business probably isn't going to
Yeah.
be doing that well. Let us read the 900 pages of payment regulation for you.
Right. So can I ask you this? A lot of the stuff that happens online falls into this category of e-commerce,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whether it's a B2B e-commerce business or a B2C e-commerce business, they're kind of the same, just the scale's different, right? So if I buy something from an online provider, it's no different than if somebody wants to buy something from, I don't know, from Cisco. I'm just making up a company, yeah?
Sure.
Right? And maybe they're buying more, the transaction amount is higher, but it's the same type of thing. I
Yes.
order online, I send them some money, blah, blah, blah. Do the people that are actually making the payment know that it's Airwallex? Do you know what I mean? Because you're this layer that's there, right? But does it say powered by Airwallex? How do they know? And should
So
they know? Do you want them to know?
yes, I mean, so oftentimes they don't know. I mean, I think sometimes what will end up happening is a merchant might choose to say that the payment is powered by Airwallex mainly as a symbol of trust, right? Just to
Yeah.
say, don't worry, this will be secure. You can trust us with this transaction. So again, stamp of kind of approval and credibility. But oftentimes we're at that kind of infrastructure layer, and so we work very much with a merchant, not necessarily the end consumer. And so our job is to make the merchant's life easier, more
Yeah.
seamless.
Can I ask you this though?
Yeah,
And
sure.
this is something that you brought up actually in the prep call. So I really want to talk about this.
Hmm.
How do you start this company, right? Or compete with the other companies, right? You talked about this idea of a challenger brand. I think it's really interesting, right?
Hmm.
Because the space is already there. There are plenty of other payment companies. Not all of them get to be that big. But how do you do that and compete in this space where the competition is so strong? And then the next thing is I love this idea of most people are building like sort of over there on the western part of the world,
Yeah.
and trying to go like, I'm going to expand to Asia, which good luck with that because it's really hard.
Yes.
But these guys did this. These guys did this in reverse. But I will say this: I don't know how familiar you are with like the first, I'll say, great, I don't know, Australian software company, which was called Sausage Software, which was started in Melbourne, I believe. So it's not there is precedent for this, but it's not
Yes.
often, right? So go ahead, maybe tell me all this stuff. Like, how hard is it in this space, and then how do you scale from east to west as opposed to west from east?
Yeah, it's not easy. I will say. I mean, it certainly wasn't easy for Jack and Max and Lucy and the team to actually, and CJ, who's our CTO, to actually get Airwallex up and running. And as with many startups, there were the ups and the downs, and a lot of pivots along the way. But I think, I've been with Airwallex now nearly 2 years. I think what I've really come to appreciate, especially vis-a-vis kind of other companies I've either worked at or partnered with
Yep.
in the space, is just the obsession with understanding the real user pain points. Like, I know a lot of people talk about product market fits and user research, etc., but really the obsession about trying to find every kind of ounce of nuance about what is a true pain, and then having product velocity to repeatedly kind of iterate and build into this pain, I think
Yep.
really has allowed the company to flourish. The second aspect, and when we talk about fintech, I think oftentimes, people bias too much on the tech side of fintech. And to be fair, I think Airwallex, again, has superb technology, great engineering and product team. But what people sometimes don't understand about fintech is a real human aspect of it. Because if I go
Tell
back
me.
to the highway analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you have really strong engineers, sometimes what ends up happening is you just build a faster car that goes on the same highway.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you don't, but that only kind of gets you so far. In order to kind of transform, what you want to do is you essentially want to make sure that you can get off the highway. You want to have an off ramp. And so the part that many people sometimes underappreciate is a real kind of partnership motion that's involved in building all these local relationships and partnerships with banks and local payment providers and whatnot, because that takes time. And that in
Yeah.
many ways is defensible. You can't engineer that overnight. That's a really human connection and investment. And so I think what Airwallex has done really well, and I think why the growth has been fairly rapid, is because we've invested in both at a kind of commensurate degree. Now,
Yeah.
the brand piece in terms of going forward, I think that's where my job comes in. If I'm doing my job, or if my team is doing the job well,
Right.
a big part of kind of entering some of these newer markets, and when we again go kind of east to west, is coming in and not essentially appearing as a commoditized plus one offering. And so
Yeah. How do you
look
do
at
it?
this from a couple of ways. I think one, the product suite has to be differentiated enough where if you look at our peer suite, usually the top players in the space tend to do one thing really well. They're either really good at accepting money, or they're really good about transferring money, or they're really good about expense management. And so you're in a world where, again, if I'm a small business or medium-sized business, I probably don't have the time to kind of maintain, 5, 6, 7, 8 different financial tools. Where Airwallex kind of has had the insight is you really stitch it end to end. So from accepting to holding to converting to paying out, to then having that expense management layer on top, bill payments, it really truly is end to end. So there's that product piece that's kind of critical as that kind of first area of importance. But then on top of that, the marketing comes in because you have to articulate that. You have to
Yeah.
let people know and cut above the noise. And that is where the branding aspect is so important. And how you do that, I think it comes down a lot to kind of trust building, especially in financial services. If you don't have trust, then you don't even have a ticket to the
You don't have
party.
anything.
You're like
You don't have
knocking on the
anything.
door saying,
Yeah.
please let me in. Um, I think that the framework that I think about when kind of building trust for any brand, and especially as we think about internationally, is, have you ever done, those workshops where they usually it's with kind of people and talent and HR, where they talk about interpersonal dynamics and they kind of break down the trust equation. Trust is reliability, credibility, intimacy, all over self-orientation. Are you familiar? Yeah.
Yep.
So
I worked at a big
Usually,
company.
exactly. So you've gone through this training, 17 times, right? Usually people really apply that to kind of interpersonal dynamics. But if you take a step back, that actually can be applied to brand building as well, because it's the
Absolutely.
same assets that are necessary to kind of building that brand. And so what we've tried to do is deconstruct that and to say, well, if it comes down to, let's say, kind of intimacy, then how you go about intimacy is really get deep with the community. It's not just about big industry events, it's micro influencers, it's investing in kind of local communities, grassroots kind of movements. If it's about credibility, it's the social proof. It's about sponsorships. We talked about McLaren. That was a
We
big
get there.
investment for us, but it
Yeah.
was really to kind of drive that credibility as well. And I mean, self-orientation, being a true partner, championing small businesses, championing those kind of step changes in the space. And so if we deconstruct it, that's a lot of how we're approaching new market entry, especially from a brand perspective.
I want to get back to the branding in a second, but I
Sure.
want to put two things together, right?
Sure.
Because you said some of these financial tech companies or fintechs, right? You said do one thing really well, but they miss the rest of the stack, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But then we also talked earlier about how some companies build all these products and they're just way too complex, right? How do you balance this idea of we do everything for you, but there's no complexity with it, right? Because this gets back, I think, to this trust thing where like you
Yeah.
can use this one thing that we do super well, right? Founded on this idea that let's just say that Forex should be easy, but we're building all these other tools around it too. But when does it get to the point where it's so complex that they're like, I can't use this anymore kind of thing? How do you keep that trust going so that they believe that everything that gets added is additive to them and it's value add? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down, it's a great question. A lot of it, I think, comes down to kind of fundamental product design and ethos and first principles, right? I mean, how we've kind of designed the Airwallex product is in a way, and the suite, I should say, or a broader solution, is in a way that can scale with any type of business. And so if you think about a lot of our, you say one kind of tranche of customers, it's really more kind of non-technical small businesses who don't have
Yeah.
engineers, don't have developers. They just want to be able to get up and running, and they want a seamless solution that's going to save them money, save them time, and just is reliable, right? But then, let's say you want more complexity, then you have the ability, almost in a modular way, to say, okay, we'll give you access to the API. So if you want to start doing things more programmatically and building your own custom solutions on top of Airwallex or with Airwallex, you can do that as well. Then if you're a platform and you want to even take it to another degree and you want to build your own fintech, really pursue embedded finance and create, new lines of revenue for yourself through financial services, you can also approach it from a modular standpoint and tap into the infrastructure. And so I think the way that the product has been designed and the way that we can speak to different audiences is to say, no matter where you are in the journey, we're not going to force you to use everything at once. We're going to essentially give you the best option or let you choose the best option for what you need at the moment. But please know that the platform is broad enough that as you grow and as you have more use cases, you can then build into it, and we'll be here to actually support you and grow with you. So again, a lot of it comes down to kind of foundational product design.
Can we talk a little bit about embedded finance as well? Like, where does it fit in? What are the products and where are the most traditional places where you're embedding this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of traction right now in terms in Western Europe and North America as well, because the embedded finance opportunity is really one that focuses on platforms and marketplaces. Because I mean, you're
Yeah.
essentially,
Yep.
if you're a platform, you have, whether you are a yoga platform, a food platform, health tech, whatever it is, edutech, you've likely done a good job of kind of building up an entire base of loyal users. You want them to be sticky. You want to, add more value to them. You want to see if you can improve your own margins, right? And so you're starting to think about what are new lines of revenue, right? Now,
Right.
it happens that a lot of this kind of platformication, I'm not even sure if that's a word, but like the
It is
rise,
now.
and there we
It
go,
is now.
right? Coin copyrighted, right?
Exactly.
But the rise and kind of prevalence of these kind of large global platforms, oftentimes we see, especially in North America and Europe. I mean, increasing in Asia, but we tend to see a lot more regional platforms in Asia Pacific. Global
Yep.
platforms tend to be, born out of the West, at least for now. And so that's where, when folks think about Airwallex's global infrastructure, they're starting to say, okay, let me actually see if we can monetize more and again create more value to our customers.
Is there a benefit for this company actually coming from Asia? Do you know what I mean? Is there a different
Yeah.
mindset that Airwallex start with? And maybe you can talk. This is the Asia Tech Podcast, right? So I'm just curious if there's like an Asian mindset or an Asian thought process or a benefit of being started in Asia and then going out to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. I think one is that when particularly we're partnering with Western businesses, oftentimes many of these businesses they don't know as much about Asia Pacific as they would like. And
Yeah.
so they kind of turn to us to say, help us demystify the region. They trust us because we've kind of grown a successful business in the region. So they say, well, these folks probably
You must know.
they at least know something, right,
Right.
about building a successful scale business. And so I think that's one major asset is just that regional kind of insight. I think the second piece, being born out of APAC, is this notion of globality from day one. And I think, they're obviously, we can debate back and forth about is the world becoming less global, more global, is trade contracting, expanding? And it's obviously will kind of, go up and down, year after
Yeah,
year, and also response to the geopolitical climate. But fundamentally, there still is a global opportunity for trade that exists in the world.
for sure.
Right?
It's not going away.
It's not going away. And so
It's not going away.
if you think about a market like the US, there are many businesses in the US that don't have this existential question to be, or existential need to be global from day one. They can buy domestically, exist domestically, sell domestically. Whereas you think about APAC, a market like Singapore, market like Hong Kong, many
Vietnam,
entrepreneurs,
anywhere, yeah.
Exactly. These are global businesses from day one. And it's
Have to
really
be.
trippy. It's trippy to think about if we had this conversation 10 years ago and we use the term multinational company, we'd be thinking about these big, gigantic corporations with
Yeah.
their, the image of the arms, reaching out and trying to, grab share everywhere. But in reality, multinationals now, thanks to technology and infrastructure, can be you and me.
I'm a multinational company. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm a multinational company.
Right?
Yeah.
And so multinational, the whole concept has been uprooted and changed through technology. I think APAC just inherently understands that. And I think Airwallex also inherently understands that.
Got it. It's a great answer, actually. I want to go back to this idea of trust because you made me think about something. I didn't want to introduce you. I didn't want to, excuse me, interrupt your train of thought before. But how many companies use Airwallex? I'm just curious.
So we have over 100,000.
Perfect. Okay, it's a big number. That's all I want to establish to the audience. That there's a big number of companies that are using Airwallex. It's not just like three guys right in the basement somewhere in Auckland. Like it's a big number.
Yep.
And if money's involved, and you said this before, right? In the financial services world, and I said it out loud, like if you don't have trust, you don't have anything.
Correct.
Right? Because at the end of the day, you're taking my money and doing something with, and if you're not going to do what you said you're going to do, I can't trust you. But Airwallex has obviously built up that trust and built up a big product suite and also has, let's just say, over 100,000 customers. So it's a lot of people. And a lot of people on the other side of that, because there's 100,000 companies. If each one of them has 10 people, it's 1 million people.
Exactly.
Do you have an insurance product that you distribute to people through this platform? And
we
should you?
We do. I mean, it's a great idea. I mean, I think when you think about,
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, and then do your answer, right? Because I want to set this up. Because if they trust you, look, I have the largest insurance podcast in the world, right? So I know this, and I talk about insurance all the time, right? And I have no vested interest per se, but if you think about if you're already talking about embedded finance, embedded insurance is a thing, and your customers probably some of them have protection gaps, and if they trust you, you could embed insurance products into all of the other products that you offer them. And not only would they get the coverage that they need and the protection that they need, but it could be another revenue stream for Airwallex and another benefit that they could sell in this whole suite of things that you do to your clients, but also their employees. Like there's a massive opportunity here to do that. I'm just wondering if you've considered that.
So I think the first response to you is, we are hiring for open senior product roles. So, if for some reason you get bored and you want to come, come to us, and no, but jokes aside, I mean, I think the way that the company operates is we do take a lot of cues also from our existing customers and what we're seeing in the market. So I think insurance is certainly not off the table. when we weighed against all the other priorities that we could potentially move into, I mean,
Yep.
there could potentially be lending, there could potentially be payroll as an example, right? I think for
Yep.
us, there's so much that we're building and continuing to launch and to scale that, I can see it being feasible, but is it necessarily going to be the item that we ship next week? Possibly not, because there are 50 other items which are probably going to get shipped next week. But the fundamental premise, I think, is sound, and certainly one which would be under discussion actively.
Fair enough. Okay. Before I let you go, I'm really interested in the McLaren thing,
Sure.
particularly because the F1 it always seems to be around us. It's a gigantic platform as well, but why would a company like Airwallex sponsor an F1 racing team? Like, what's the idea there? What do you think the output of the end result is going to be, besides just like typical brand marketing, right? Because you specifically went after like a sector there. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the idea? I'm super curious.
Yeah, I mean, we went through several months of kind of research, because when we were thinking about what's the best way to kind of build a brand, and when I deconstructed into reliability, credibility, intimacy, right? We looked across different dimensions, weighed everything from sponsorships to big out-of-home campaigns, and we realized sponsorships, there's actually some great potential there. And then we started looking at different sports, different teams, different individual athletes. I think what we liked about F1 as a sport overall was, again, Airwallex is inherently global in nature. I mean, we serve global companies, global is in our DNA, and that's the same with F1 as well. It's essentially kind of a traveling road show. And you look at the driver lineup, you look at you create these moments of momentum 24 times a year in kind of different cities around the world, right? And so we like the kind of global nature of it. We also liked the bias more towards technology and innovation and forward thinking. I mean, so much of an F1 team's success comes down to the engineering ability and the kind of prowess. And when it came to McLaren in particular, I think a few things stood out. I think one, the values were definitely aligned. We weren't just going to partner with them and just slap on a logo and then go home, right?
Walk away. Yeah, you can't.
Exactly.
That never works anyway.
That never works. But I think what we saw was that if you look at McLaren's heritage as well, Bruce McLaren essentially being somewhat of a challenger, kind of challenging the status quo as a driver himself. He was with an established team, and he went off and did his kind of own entrepreneurial venture, which was McLaren, and it scaled to what it is today. So there was that kind of ethos, and there was again also that kind of commitment to kind of forward thinking, technological prowess. McLaren does a lot in terms of sustainability as well, and so again, we like that forward thinking kind of nature of that team. And we also were really keen to make sure that the partnership was authentic. From a brand perspective, I didn't really care that much about, again, just putting the logo. I cared about being able to tell that authentic story of McLaren actually using Airwallex's products to kind of power their own payments and financial operations, because that's how you get the credibility. No one really believes you if you just put McLaren on a billboard. They start to believe you if there's a case study that says, we're saving McLaren lots of time and money through our kind of own products, right? So I think there's that aspect. What we want to get out of it, really, again, it comes down to the notion of the credibility. It comes down also to the intimacy. They've been phenomenal partners, and the fact that we can do a lot of community events with them, and really kind of tap into the kind of local cities. Like in Singapore this week for the Grand Prix, we have quite a fascinating exhibit happening where we're going to unveil this kind of first of its kind 3D perception shifting sculpture of one of McLaren's drivers, Lando Norris. And
wow.
it was
Where's
done by, so it's at 39 Plus Art Space. So if you're familiar with Singapore, Tanjung Pagar, so it's the 19th to the 22nd. But it's being done and conceived by this phenomenal kind of world-renowned artist, Michael Murphy. So Michael's out of New York, and if you're not familiar with his work, he's just done some iconic perception shifting sculptures for featuring Barack Obama and Lionel Messi and Michael Jordan. And so when we also think about approaching brand in a different way as a challenger, Airwallex isn't partnering with McLaren and just doing a bunch of boring talking head videos that show the car going around and cheesy analogies around speed and efficient. Like No, we're showing off, and we're
Please.
trying to have a different approach. We're trying to weave in culture and arts, and so that's again how we think about building that challenger brand and cutting above the noise.
Super interesting. Okay, I'm going to let you go. Jon Stona, Vice President Global Marketing at Airwallex. This was super interesting. I'm really glad you did this. This should not be the last time we have you on the show.
I would be delighted to come back, Michael. Thank you so much for your time as well, and for all that you do in the Asia tech space as well. Certainly a joy and privilege.